Thanks very much, Lindsay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dan Courtwright. I'm currently serving as the Vice Chair on the Historic Preservation Commission in Buena Vista. And during this project, I chaired our subcommittee for the development of the architectural design guidelines. So I opted to carry on with those duties and present to you today. And like Lindsay said, we really are hoping to have a facilitated discussion approach. So please don't hesitate with comments or questions. It'll really make the presentation as dynamic as it can be, given the limitations of Zoom and video conferencing to get this done. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in person, but until then, we'll do the best we can with what we've got, right?
Slide DIY design guidelines.
Real briefly, we'll cover the webinar goals for today and hopefully give you guys a little bit of insight into why we structured the presentation the way we did and what we put in it. And really, when we set about fulfilling the request to develop this presentation, it was with the idea that the majority of our audience would be relatively new to the game preservationists like myself, who may be considering going down this road for your town or your locality. And we really put a lot of the focus on delivering our lessons learned, so that you could reflect on your own journey that you may be about to start on. And a big part of that was helping everybody understand the time and scale that went into it, because at the outset of any project, it either looks like you're at the top of the mountain and you're never going to get there, or you think, hey, this will be quick and easy. So the truth is usually somewhere in between. Hopefully we can add some color to that. This seems like a good place to say thank you to the supporting staff. So Lindsay's predecessor, Erica Dubich, saw a lot of value in what we were doing and asked us to develop this presentation. And then when Lindsay came on board, she absolutely encouraged us to continue. And I want to say thank you for that support to help us get this presentation off of our devices and onto your screen today. And a big part of that partnership going forward is for whether it's your local town government, History Colorado, or anybody else that could be in a supporting staff role for local preservationists. Hopefully you can kind of look at our story today and the things we bring out and add some insight into how you can support your preservationists in a similar endeavor. And then lastly, for our own benefit, just an amazing amount of experience and knowledge in our peer group that's in the audience today. So again, with that facilitated discussion approach, rather than me just droning, we're really hoping to get some insights into how we can continue to grow these guidelines and capitalize on all the effort that we put in going forward. So your insights and inputs really valuable as we go through this today.
Slide key takeaways. Something is better than nothing.
Slide for the key takeaways. I know a lot of folks might have to drop off or go on mute for one reason or another. But these are the things we really wanted to leave you with, and I'm just going to give them to you on the front end of the presentation. So as we drill down into details, you have these bullet points to fall back on. And the number one thing that stood out to me when I was reflecting on our experience is it's real easy to focus in on the details of creating a document, the actual architectural design guidelines. But it turned out that wasn't even half of our effort. I mean, at its core, this is a political endeavor. And there's so many tangential things to make sure that whatever document you draft has a chance at success, that the work on the front end was so much more important than the content and development of the document itself. So we'll touch on that a little bit. As we were working on this, it became clear that we were not working in a vacuum, right? We're not just going to put ourselves in a room, draft a document, and then expect it to hit the ground running when we open the door and declare ourselves to be done with our drafting, and keeping that open mind and channels for inputs really help get through the entire project, not just the drafting. And a big part of that was the relationships with our town staff. Local government was key. We needed them to be involved and engaged from the beginning, understand what it was we were trying to do. And in doing so, they were able to see where they could help in real time versus, critiquing a document and then trying to go back and undo things that were done. And the public was kind of the same way, that same level of engagement from the public and having those ideas and buy-in to really help keep us on track during the drafting process, not after. And then the same mentality holds once it's complete, right? We don't want to just have this thing go on a shelf. So having a process baked into the guidelines that you're developing to ensure continued engagement on the back end and a robust review process, all were really key. So those are the themes that we're going to be touching on as we delve into the details. And before we dive into that, I think this would be a great time for me to take a breath and just entertain anybody's questions about what did I just say or what did I mean? So yeah, anybody?
The first bullet point reads, actual guideline drafting isn't even half of the effort.
Yes, this
Great.
is Mike Katernick from Erie. When you talk about public engagement, was this holding town hall sessions? It was this, how did you kind of draw the public to some sort of a session or whatever to gain their input?
The short answer is yes, definitely a public forum. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about our marketing is what it boiled down to, is letting people know we were doing this and really soliciting the inputs, both for the benefit of the inputs themselves, as well as the opportunity for public comment to make sure that there wasn't any 11th hour objections for folks that hadn't had a chance to make a contribution in terms of ideas or objections on the front end. So great question. That is coming up. And please follow up at the end and let me know if the way we address that answers the questions that you might have.
The second bullet point reads, guideline development does not occur in a vacuum.
Lindsay, I can do a slide and I think this one right here, I just want to touch on the fact that the content and the way that we talk about these things today is absolutely only our perspective as the Buena Vista Preservation Commission. Thinking about all the experiences that you all must have had throughout your time in preservation, different perspectives are naturally expected. And I'm looking forward to hearing your take on some of the issues that I bring up here.
Slide, Town of Buena Vista historical background.
One thing to say about this slide is I thought it would be remiss to assume as we dove into these slides that everybody was super familiar with Buena Vista. So just a little bit of background. Geographically, we're centrally located in the upper Arkansas River Valley, just a little bit south of Leadville. I think a lot of preservationists would be familiar with where Leadville's at, and just north of Salida. So the timeframes we're dealing with here, settlement by European settlers could be traced back to the 1860s. Obviously, a lot of exploration ahead of that, whether it was Lieutenant Pike or fur trading. But for the purposes of our Preservation Commission, and when we talk about the buildings, that settlement can be traced back to the 1860s. Town incorporation in 1879, and I wanted everybody to really understand that this was a mining, railroad, and agricultural town. And you can kind of see that in the buildings that we're trying to preserve and the reason the town is set up the way it is and where it is specifically. And kind of flip in that bullet, I kind of had to make a tough decision about, well, how much do we really talk about? But the bottom line is a lot of history happened. There's so much to talk about, and it's absolutely a rabbit hole we could go down. But I wanted to point out Susie Kelly's book, Buena Vista, Tales from the Past. She is a tenured member of our commission, a longtime resident of Chaffee County. It is not just words when we say that she wrote the book. She's absolutely our conscience. And for anybody interested in more background on the town, please do what you can to find that book or engage Susie through the Chaffee County Times. It's like she's really responsive to email requests about the history of the county and Buena Vista in particular. But really what we had to do was just fast forward to 2015, because that's when we had a town comprehensive plan that really addressed where does preservation fall in the priorities for our town. And if we click to the next slide, you can kind of get a sense of where we're at on our journey. So, 200 plus years of history happening, and we get our preservation ordinance passed in July of 2016. So the takeaway from this discussion and what I want you to have as background to understand as we go into the details of how and why we developed our architectural design guidelines, we're sprinting to catch up. Our first HPC meeting was August of 2016. A huge plus is we've had the great support of town staff since the inception of our HCP, and it's only strengthened as time has gone on, including our CLG designation that came shortly thereafter. And that's when being able to tap into the support of History Colorado has been amazing. That's great. But again, we're firmly in that zone of we don't know what we don't know. And having the structure of a CLG has been great in the sense of giving our commission direction. And the biggest step we took since that inception was getting started on our survey work. Three Gables Preservation contracted to do that work for us and produced that document in the end of 2017 and into the spring of 18 that really gave us a sense on what is it that we need to prioritize. A quick word about that image that I used on the slide on the bottom. You can kind of see that placard says by order of the Preservation Commission. And it just kind of struck me as funny because by order of implies authority. And as we all know, this is a cooperative effort. So that's a big theme going forward. When we talk about our drafting process for this document is the cooperation rather than by the order of. Does anybody have any questions about our town background or the background of our HPC before we proceed?
An image on the slide shows a posted notice of public hearing.
Great, thanks.
Slide, the need for architectural design guidelines.
So let's talk about the need for architectural design guidelines. When I kind of imagine the situation that other towns might be in and deciding, is this something that we do or do we not want to do? It brought me back to our inventory from that survey of our historic structures and what is it that we're actually trying to preserve, right? It should seem like a self-evident thing, like, well, we're trying to preserve historic buildings. But in the end, if we're going to develop guidelines, it's a tool. So we need to make that user-friendly and approachable. So the first thing that we saw is when we look at what everybody has at their disposal, which would be the Secretary of the Interior standards and guidance from the National Park Service. I think anybody that's looked at those could agree that it's more oriented towards professionals and less towards property owners and lay people. So what we really wanted to do is distill down the ideas in those documents and make them accessible. The other big thing that you would think would be intuitive is, yes, we want to preserve the historic buildings, but rather than talking about strictly paint colors on a parapet or windows, we also have a lot of pressure from infill projects in our town, which is something we absolutely desire to get done. Empty lots are also bad for the historic buildings they're next to. But we wanted to be able to inform the design of those infill projects to make sure that they didn't put undue pressure on the historic properties for the area that we were trying to cover.
The subtitle reads, What We Saw as Commissioners.
And then a corollary to that is recognizing the character that the inventory of our historic buildings lends to the town and really incorporate in our guidelines a way to think about how infill projects might impact that character and just try to stay consistent, recognize and capitalize on the character that those buildings create. So that was our view as commissioners for the need. That kind of added a little more detail. It was really key to developing the design guidelines as we entered into the drafting process.
Hey, Dan, were you guys doing design review projects prior to this, or was it your program sort of ramping up to be able to do design review?
Lindsay, that is a great question. Thank you for asking it that way. I wish I would have just hit that in the slide, but yes, we had undertaken, and even before I came on the board, some design reviews without the benefit of published guidelines. And that really also helped crystallize the need in our minds for a set of guidelines to work off of when we did the design reviews. Specifically, On the west end of East Main Street was the old railroad hospital that was redeveloped into the BV Square. It's somewhat commercial mostly, and there's a splash park. It's really a nice addition to the town, but we were approached as a commission for some design review work on that, and it had a great outcome. We were able to achieve a lot of things with the property owners and developers, but definitely would have been easier with design guidelines in place.
Were you using the Secretary of Interior standards for that project?
Absolutely. I would let John add some detail on this if he wants to, but more internally to develop our feedback for that design review versus, opening the book and showing the property owner or developer what the Secretary of Interior standards were.
Dan's video feed is replaced by John's.
And let me jump in, Lindsay. It was, the building we're talking about was it was 2 stories high, wood frame, wood clapboard, historic, the classic tall, skinny windows, storefronts on the bottom. And the developer wanted to rip the entire front of the building off. And this is a big building. It's probably 100 foot long, maybe longer, and put up contemporary brick and then clad the sides and back of the building with dark gray corrugated metal. So it would have looked like a pre-engineered metal building. It would have destroyed its historic character. And we were fortunate enough because we have people like Mark, our planner, who steered the developer to us. And we were just starting. This was probably 2017, maybe 2016, right after we started. And we sat down with the developer and basically tried to steer him toward a win-win solution that would save the building's skin and not cost him any money. And in my mind, the reason that we saved that building is the solutions we proposed were either cost neutral or saved money. And because most of our experience is if we want a developer to do something that costs money, his answer is no.
Does anybody have any follow-up questions on our challenges of conducting design reviews ahead of development of architectural design guidelines? That was a great point from Lindsay. Thank you. All right. Well, the need for ADG, like we kind of said, is intuitive, but a big part of that is then reminding the folks that we're working for what the goals were. And if you remember from the background, being relatively young as a preservation commission and moving so fast to kind of catch up, the support we had from the town in terms of drafting our preservation ordinance and getting it adopted was great. But then all of a sudden, here we are within the span of under 24 months coming back with a big proposal that's going to really impact growth and planning within the core of our downtown. So we had to take that to the Board of Trustees and ensure that buy-in continued. Remember, we talked about we're not developing in a vacuum. So for whatever locality it is, whether it's a county or town council, in our case, it was the Board of Trustees, and the work that was done in that comprehensive plan to establish preservation as a priority for the community was really key. So we were able to bring that back, quantify the preservation goals, as well as the pressures on the inventory of historic buildings through the sheer number of permitting requests and site plans that were coming into our planning department. So we're able to relate all that back to the priorities that the comp plan established, and then familiarize our Board of Trustees with design guidelines as a tool to accomplish those preservation goals that were highlighted in the comp plan. The bottom line is it's obvious, like this is going to be a lot of work for a small group of folks that are already pulled in so many different directions. So essentially, this is the Preservation Commission saying, hey, the comp plan had these down as action items, but we're volunteering to do the action, right? We're not just asking the town for work. We're going to do it, but in partnership. So the next slide kind of highlights how we partnered with our local government to both say, we're going to do as much of the heavy lifting as we can on this, but we're not just going to run off in our own direction. So right off the bat, we had a strong participation from our town staff in the form of an associate clerk, assistant clerk that would always come to our meetings. So they always had situational awareness of what we were doing and what we were working on. As the town staff was restructured and we got closer to really starting work on these design guidelines, our Mark During, who's on the call with us today, our senior planner in town, really became available for all our meetings and really provided just the deep insights that the town staff was dealing with on a day in and day out basis to help keep our goals informed and, I would say, realistic. And I can't overstate how valuable it was to have that level of engagement from our town staff as we embarked on this project and throughout it, really. Some of the other town entities that we cooperated with to varying degrees, planning and zoning. Obviously, we would have loved to have spent more time with the actual planning and zoning board, but again, very busy. Main Street USA, who has a big tie-in with preservation. And then some of the other advisory boards in town are beautification. John, you want to jump in? Any other boards that you reached out to?
Yeah, we did chamber. We hit some realtors, but we tried to cover everybody that was interested. Let's put it that way. And Dan, you're going to talk about the detail about being on the radio and all that stuff. Okay. Absolutely, it's coming up.
Slide, partnering with local government.
The bottom line, and really just what we wanted to leave you with here is the HPC is putting ourselves out there to help achieve the objectives of the comp plan. We're not just pounding our table and asking for action from somebody else. Basically for lack of money, we're putting our time where our mouth is to make it happen for the town.
The subtitle reads, Build Consensus.
But within that, we have to kind of recognize our limitations. So we set about determining scope. So once we had gone in front of the BOT and got in their charge to embark on this project and draft design guidelines for the town, it's kind of a big undertaking. So we kind of have to determine how we're going to eat that elephant, right? So if you flip over to the next slide, I'm going to drill down into how we determine scope a little bit. The image on the right shows what we settled on, which is our historic East Main Street is what we endeavored to call it.
I'm sorry, Dan, can I ask you a question really quickly about your last slide?
Yeah, please do.
Sorry, I really don't want to interrupt, but I was curious about how the process of receiving input from these different groups and parties, how you managed that. I'm sure that I'm not in the only place where different groups would have, I guess, their own agendas, their own opinions, their own ideas about what is important and what should or shouldn't be allowed, guidelines and best practices be damned, I guess. So I'm curious about how you navigated those varying perspectives and sort of put them together in a way that made sense and made all the parties involved fairly happy, if you did.
Yeah, right. I think the jury's still out on that last bit, but great question. And I can definitely add some color, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that. Mm-hmm. I think the best example I can give you is we had great participation from Main Street USA when it was still active in Buena Vista that kind of exemplified our approach to exactly what you're asking, I think. And the bottom line was a clear and open invitation to come to us. But more important than that was showing a willingness to go where they are. So I personally, with Main Street, and then our other commissioners kind of divvied up, going to where those associate and peer organizations were at. So we will go to their meetings. We would present to them, to look them in the eye in person and ask for their input. And keep in mind, this was early 2018, when the before times when we could do that. But to whatever extent we can meet these groups where they're at and show that deference and respect for their time and their opinion. And one of the things that you brought out was when goals aren't necessarily aligned and they may not be super receptive. We tended to look at that less as a challenge and more as an opportunity to gain that insight into where resistance to this project would be coming from. And I think the best way to summarize and give everybody on the conference today something that they can remember is we stayed in listening mode. The extent of our talking was saying, we're doing this because the comp plan said we needed to, and the town has asked us to. But before we really get to the doing part, we are listening. So we want to hear all your concerns, especially when you're worried that this is not going to work out well for your group specifically or the town in general, and make sure we really think critically about how we can address those concerns and determine what's valid versus what's panic. But then never looking that group in the face or that individual in the face and saying that's panic, because to them it's very real, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really healthy perspective and really helpful.
Thanks. I think we'll come back to that a lot. So if anybody sees those themes coming up in a few minutes here, definitely let's try to relate that back to, that was a great question.
Thanks.
So the big thing on scope is we have a lot of different zoning areas in the town, like everybody does. And each one of those has some historic inventory in it. But if you think back to the slide where we were talking about the need for guidelines, what really jumped out at us was the area that you see in the visual here is our most concentrated area of historic buildings. It's undergoing the most pressure from infill projects that are going to influence how those historic buildings are valued. And it was right in front of us, right? The survey was already done, where we're still doing survey work on historic properties throughout the remainder of town. Essentially, we have to get started somewhere, and something's better than nothing, if you'll remember from maybe the third slide. So we could either try to do it all at once, try to address everything while development is going on, or we can just focus in on historic East Main, get started, and then build in an opportunity for add-ons later. So this was our crawl, walk, run, where a run would have been, let's put it all on paper, let's cover the entire town, let's try to think of every what if, versus the crawl of, let's make a really user-friendly document that's clear and to the point, specific to these few blocks that you can kind of see depicted here. And sorry for the orientation. It was as much as we could fit on the slide, a little bit of an eye chart, but you can see how much of town we ruled out in favor of addressing this concentration of inventory.
On an aerial photograph, a dotted red line borders a proposed historic district.
So we flip over to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about what Mark alluded to. I'm sorry, not Mark, but John O'Brien, in terms of our public outreach and marketing. Essentially, we reminded the town and government, the elected officials, of our responsibilities as a CLG and the priorities of preservation that were established by the comp plan. But the town is a whole different issue. So some portion of our public responded to the surveys that informed that comprehensive plan and said that it was important. Now we're going back to them and saying, guess what? You told us preservation was important. This is the action that's happening as a result. but we want your ideas. We want to hear your concerns, starting with where there's agreement, which obviously that was the comp plan. I mean, everybody that lives in town is familiar with our buildings, is loosely familiar with history. Our visiting population that comes in the summer for our tourism also really values the character that these historic properties create. So that's our pitch, really. The core of our elevator pitch is, hey, these buildings really make us unique. Sure, there's historic buildings in other places, but the way they're arranged in our town creates this character, and that's what we're setting out to preserve. So business property owners, realtors all see that too, and see it as an asset to be protected, right? In those conversations, when we start with where there's agreement, we then show, kind of like I alluded to previously, an openness to their objections or their ideas that have no grounding or basis in preservation goals, but they really are going to determine whether or not these architectural design lines are able to get adopted as a tool. So we're really wanting to show people the Venn diagram of preservation and growth, and really, where we can, show where there's that win-win, and we'll come back to the things that are at odds with our preservation goals down the line. But what we didn't want to do was, let the perfect be the enemy of the good, not get anything adopted at all, and be right back to where we were in 2015, where we're being asked to undertake design reviews without a set of guidelines that we've all participated in drafting and agreed upon. It really makes those conversations that much easier to have. But how are we going to get that word out there? It's like one thing to say we want to do it and then actually do it. So lots of different ways we can get that out there. We're going to talk about that on the next slide. But the key point is, whatever your medium, clear, concise, and consistent. So agree to it within your drafting committee first, within your preservation commission first. What is it we're trying to do? How are we going to talk about this? And then we'll go forward on these channels. So real quick, if you flip the slide, this was basically our pitch: is we're doing this, but we want your input. And we tried to be as visible as we could. Now, realistically, I don't know what the newspaper situation's like in everybody's town, and I think it's easy for someone to say, really, who's reading newspapers these days? But in our community, it really is still a big deal, even if it's a digital medium. And then just driving around and listening to the radio, we really get a lot of great local news support for everything that our town commissions are doing. So we reached out in that way. And then don't be afraid to hit the pavement, knock on doors of these property owners, the business owners who are renting from the property owners. Let them know that this is an undertaking and we're really looking for their input. So we put out direct mail flyers, and then have a way for them to get back to us as well, right? Because they may not have anything to say right then in that awkward moment where you've knocked on their door and introduced yourself, but they're going to think about it that night. So we created an email account specific to them to be able to give us their feedback. And the one thing I really want to say about whatever feedback you get, agree or disagree, include or don't include, we try to reinforce the fact that we were listening by responding to every comment and letting folks know where it ended up. The legitimate comments, right? If somebody took the time to come to our meeting, if they took the time to send us an email, we try to be as diligent as possible about saying, thank you for your engagement. This is what I understood you to have said. This is how we're going to incorporate it into our drafting process. And please continue to be engaged with us throughout this process and see if your idea or concern was addressed. And then one big thing I need to wrap up with here is social media. If you want to flip over. Again, in this day and age, it's like, well, hey, this is where my audience is at. Why would I not go this direction? really want to let everybody know that our experience showed us that we want to limit our messaging on social media to creating awareness that this project is going on. But what we don't want to do is debate the merits of architectural design guidelines or any specific idea within that forum. It's just a huge drain on the time and energy, and it's a big opportunity to lose control of your message. So I'll take a pause there because we're going to shift gears, and as we wrap this up in the next 10 minutes, and really let anybody speak up with questions they might have about how that public engagement played out in the form of the public forums that we invited folks to submit comment in person.
Dan pauses on a slide titled Stakeholder and Public Outreach with a picture of the Historic Preservation Commission Facebook page.
Hey, Dan, I'm going to pile on a couple of things. We probably talked to every business owner that was affected by this effort over a 2-year period of time, in some cases, multiple times. We always had a draft of our guidelines available online that anybody could look at and comment on. We had multiple in-person meetings. We had, Dan was on the radio advertising. So I think we did a really, we put a lot of time into communication. The feedback, Dan was excellent at acknowledging every single comment in a positive way. Now, we didn't agree with all of them, but Dan took the time to acknowledge every single one. So, Dan, great job.
Thanks. Lindsay, can you flip a slide for me?
3 bar graphs show community voting.
On this, what I wanted to convey to everybody here is the input versus opportunity for feedback and folks' ideas. Like in a perfect world, we would have had a massive turnout, lots of great ideas, lots of great debate in the room. But to be honest, sometimes it was Mark, our lead town planner, and a half dozen of us commissioners in a room with no members of the public showing up. But we took it as an opportunity to go over some of the input that we had received. The important thing was the opportunity for input, right? Ideally, we want a lot of good ideas, but if we can't have that all the time, at least the opportunity was there. So when we go before the Board of Trustees, no one has the ability to raise their hand and say, we didn't have a chance to comment. That is a valuable in and of itself, is to create these communication channels, create the public forums, create that opportunity to get the input. If you get it, great. If you don't, you had the chance, right? And then again, we'll keep those open going forward. So that email account's still active. There's going to be public access to all of our meetings, just like always. And then our continued engagement going forward in our review process, the public will have the opportunity to continue to be involved.
The subtitle reads Quantify Support, followed by 6 bullet points.
I think with that in mind, I kind of talked through that, but let's go to the next slide anyway, so that we can give a shout out to Vic and BV Heritage, our lovely courthouse / cell phone tower. Vic and BV Heritage are keeping it in great shape and making it a huge part of the character on East Main Street.
The subtitle changes to Timing and Perception, an image of the courthouse in Buena Vista.
One quick word about timing on that second bullet. Add emphasis to that listening mode that we talked about before by ensuring that a good portion of these public engagement events happen ahead of formal drafting, right? You don't want people to think like, hey, we already wrote everything, it's a done deal, but now we're asking for your input. When you hold these forums, when you go out on social media or on the radio, we are going to begin drafting. Before we do that, we would really like to have input from the community. Please come out, please hit us up at this email, right? All right, so to close out the presentation today, we're going to get you through the actual drafting process. What did we do within our HPC? And then really try to reserve the last 15 minutes for questions. But again, like, where do we start? This is so big. So the goals, influences that we use, the team that we built, the tech that we used, some things that we wish we had, and then what we learned from it all. All right. let's dive in. So obviously the NPS guidance, we talked about that being more for the professionals, full-time preservationists, folks in our position that really work with this on a day-to-day basis, and wanting to distill that down. So again, analyzing the character of what district or what area it is that are we really trying to protect, and then targeting your draft at that particular inventory of historic buildings. So if you remember, one of our goals and needs was to be able to inform the infill projects, not get distracted by residentially zoned areas that, yes, we do want to address down the line, but did not need to be included in this document that we were developing. Obviously, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, so we're going to take a look at, you know, other folks that successfully adopted and implemented guidelines. And John did really the bulk of the legwork on that with multiple documents from all over the state and the nation. And then diving into the write and review. But one thing that we kind of saw immediately and avoided this mistake, thankfully, was the too many cooks in the kitchen syndrome, where if there's a lot of people working on something at the same time, we're kind of tripping over each other and not getting anything done. So Katie Welter as our chair and John as our vice at the time had the intuition to say, you know, we really need to distill this down to a subcommittee. And what I want to encourage everyone to take away from this is, like, think about the skills and abilities you need when you build that team, right? Somebody that's proficient in writing, somebody that's proficient in tech. For us, one big key was having Susie Kelly, who is really knowledgeable firsthand of the history of the town and the county, to be able to help us integrate the why behind a particular guideline mattered. And just be able to leverage the variety of skills, right? If we'd have a bunch of really stellar preservationists, but nobody can open a PowerPoint, that's going to be tough.
The final bullet point reads, write and review, easier said.
The other big benefit that I want to point out was having the subcommittee do that work and then bring the results to the HPC really went a long way towards that goal of speaking with one voice when we had to communicate outside of the commission.
Dan pauses on the slide titled Our Drafting Process.
Hey, Dan, let me jump in for 1 second. If there are people here listening to this that you want to do your own guidelines, if you take anything away from this, it's that website at the top of this slide, because it's, you know, the Secretary of Interior standards are this voluminous document, but this NPS guidance, National Park Service, in English, it tells you what's important and how to put together your own guidelines. It's really a pretty good document, I think.
Dan's video feed replaces John's.
Hey, Lindsay, if I could get you to click 2 slides ahead. Kind of got some momentum going there. Sorry. I wanted to speak to a couple of tech issues that we ran into and just give everybody on the call today a heads up. If you look at the visual on the side, you can kind of see we have a spell check window and Portuguese is highlighted. So that's a roundabout way to let you know that, yes, we did cut and paste from other documents where it made sense, but it really created issues due to the fact that we had no control over the formatting of the documents that we were using. And this is one of the issues that cropped up, is when we would go to spell check our work, something that we had cut and pasted in was defaulting all the review and editing software to the Portuguese language. And we spent so much time trying to untangle that knot that it actually detracted from the opportunities we had to work on legitimate drafting sometime. So don't be afraid to start with a clean sheet or find somebody on your team that can really resolve those tech issues. And maybe it would have been an investment in some technology, right? We had a mix of PCs versus Apple products. We had a mix of Word versus PDF for version control. And just to segue to that point, if a document is leaving this drafting team or the HPC, we really tried to limit it to PDF work so that edits couldn't be made without our knowledge. And then within our drafting team or sharing it out to folks with comments, making sure that the version that we were working off of as a drafting team, control was maintained by that subcommittee, and it was just a copy with track changes. So make sure to look into getting someone on your team that's conversant in all that technology before diving in. It's easier to have it on the front end and then go back and fix it on the back end.
The subtitle reads, Tech Issues.
So some things we wish we would have had, if we can flip forward a slide. I didn't get a chance to assess the age group that was involved here, but this was a staple for me on TV growing up. And I kind of felt like this a lot of the time going through this process is like, I have a lot of ingredients in front of me. I'm trying to figure out what I have to put in right now, and I'm just really disorganized and comical. So hopefully that analogy resonates here. But the big thing we would have benefited from was the participation of our town's legal staff on the front end. And I think our town contracts it out. So our legal representation covers a lot of other towns as well. And consequently, their workload is pretty high, bandwidth pretty low. But an opportunity to have them in on the front end and speak to the structure of our document and what we were trying to achieve would have been great. The reason being is we spent a lot of time talking about regulatory versus advisory.
The subtitle reads, Missing Ingredients.
You can flip forward a slide on that.
Slide, Our Drafting Process, Takeaways.
Takeaways, cut and paste isn't necessarily a time saver. The scope of the document was super important. Depending on your town's situation or budget allocations, the efficiency of a consultant prepared document would have negated really the whole project, to be honest, just based on cost alone. And don't lose sight of the fact that we're trying to use these design guidelines not for their own sake, but it's a tool to manage growth and change within the historic areas of our town.
An image of historic Buena Vista accompanies 8 bullet points.
If we go forward to the next slide, the visual on this one is community, right? What does our community want out of this tool? And then what do we need it to be to achieve our goals as an HPC? And for us, that boiled down to collaboration or control. And we had to really be realistic with ourselves in answering this question, because if you remember at the background, we were talking about being young as an HPC, hurrying to catch up. Our processes, frankly, were not really mature enough for the control and regulation side, so we defaulted to collaboration. And having that debate on the front end would have really smoothed our drafting process, because there's a big difference that we found in drafting a regulatory document that was going to carry the force of law versus guidelines that are designed to enhance collaboration with stakeholders in town. Flip over, please. Getting close to the end, everybody. I just wanted to highlight how we finished off our draft and then take it back to the Board of Trustees. We talked about wanting to give you a sense of time and scale on this project. We went to the HPC with the idea to draft these guidelines in late 2017, permission to do so in 18, and fast forward all the way to January of 21 before adoption. And COVID did play a big part in that in terms of us not being able to get together. But every time we have to publicly notice a meeting, all the public forums that I hopefully highlighted how vital they were to participation, that took time. And then a line by line review for our commissioners to go through and really understand what was in the document so that we could have a vote to approve and recommend to the Board of Trustees for adoption. With one last public forum for comment in the Board of Trustee meeting, and then a vote to adopt. Fortunately, it went in our favor. You can look at the next slide. I threw in a visual of the ordinance that adopted the guidelines. So they're standalone, adopted by a resolution. An alternative would have been as an appendix or addendum to our municipal code. But this way, again, we wanted to stress that this is a tool that we're going to use as the HPC to foster collaboration. And hopefully the processes that the town staff uses in reviewing permitting requests, site plans, is going to direct those property owners and developers to us so that we can start on that collaboration together. Slide. Bottom line is their advisory. This is a project that's going on in our town right now that we did a design review on while we were in the drafting phase. But the difference between working off our draft design guidelines and our previous design reviews without them was night and day. It really allowed us to be concise, direct, and collaborative with the property owners. And we got a lot of positive feedback of the value of the experience.
Slide implementation.
So the bottom line is just a shared understanding of what preservation is, what our goals are within the district when we're all reading from the same sheet of music using these design guidelines. You can flip over the slide, one more visual for you guys. This is a bank building that was developed. In this side that you're looking at, the elevation is facing historic East Main Street. And there's a lot of things looking at this that we wish that we could have had, but there's also a lot of wins, right? The modern kind of bank side of the building is facing the side street. And we were able to get the storefront windows in, the recessed entryway, some cooperation on materials. And we were able to do that out of our draft guidelines. Again, our processes internally really weren't robust enough, mature enough to attack this project from a regulatory standpoint. So we want to take a look at the wins, right?
The subtitle reads Regulatory Process.
Real quick word on the road ahead before we open it up to your questions. And sorry we ran over time. I want to save at least the last 5 minutes. The visual on this one shows one of our historic residential structures. This is not covered in the design guidelines that we're talking about today. It's included in some survey work that we recently got done. And this is where we have to turn our attention now is we want to be able to provide these property owners the same benefits of distilled, concentrated, and really focused guidelines to help maintain their property that we did to the commercial district on historic East Main. And that's where we're going to be going in the future. And our road to do that is the review process that we baked in, right? So every 6 months, we promised the board of trustees would come back to them, let them know about our design reviews, how it's going, what are some things that we wish could have been regulatory to get better cooperation on when we couldn't convince a developer that it was the best way to go. And then really take a look at how we can expand out and offer those same services to the other zoned areas in town.
Slide conclusion. Self-produced ADG are attainable.
Lindsay, if you want to flip ahead to the last slide, we'll let folks read through the conclusions on their own. But the bottom line here is self-produced design guidelines are attainable. Again, they're not going to look perfect, but is that really what you want? We really just want something on paper to be able to move forward and build the preservation ethic within our community. So thanks everybody for considering what we talked about today, and I want to take your questions.